legalizefreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Listen without limits. Unchain your brain. Change your thinking. Change your life. legalizefreedom.com.
I see in Fight Club the strongest and smartest men who've ever lived. I see all this potential, and I see it squandered. God damn it, an entire generation pumping gas, waiting tables, slaves with white collars. Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need. We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no Great War, no Great Depression. Our Great War is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression is our lives. We've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars, but we won't. We're slowly learning that fact. And we're very, very pissed off.
Greetings and welcome once again to legalizefreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffitt and my guest today is James Tunney. In the latest in a series of dialogues, we ask what steps might be taken to resist the rise of AI and the technocratic takeover of our lives. Spiraling complexity, exponential energy use, and complete dependence on the grid are the system's Achilles heel, and the source of its power and control can potentially be turned against it. Human creativity and spontaneity are powerful weapons in resisting the machine mind, which is why they are being targeted for elimination. The numbers of those being sucked into the system and those seeking to escape it are both increasing, but the advantage still lies with the techno-totalitarians. The comfort of the velvet-lined cage may yet numb humans into accepting their annihilation, should they awaken too late to their true potential. Hello and welcome, James. Thank you so much for joining us yet again on legalizefreedom.com.
It's always a pleasure, Greg. I'm looking forward to the conversation, as usual.
Okay, so as the last couple of times, James, we'll dispense with your biographical information.
Yes.
There's a link to your website and your work available on the interview page for this interview at legalizefreedom.com. We will, if people are new to the subjects we're talking about here, artificial intelligence, the development thereof, and transhumanism and the technocracy, I'd maybe advise they do a bit of research. They could do worse than going back over our series of interviews. Again, they're all linked on the interview page for this. But we're picking up kind of where we left off last time with our talk, which was based on your latest book, The Mythic Aim of AI, Maiming the Mind. One of the thoughts that we left off was, and I know we're diving straight in here, and this is why I urge listeners to check out the previous episodes. We talked about the technocratic elites, the would-be controllers, the World Economic Forum, the Davos, all the sort of transnational, non-governmental organizations and what lies behind those and their agendas, but also concluding really with their fears, what's driving this transhumanist thing, about doing away with, the family unit and the human body, getting beyond our physical form, which is actually really amazing and magical when you look at it, and becoming something else, this idea of like living forever and augmentation, so that all the things that happen to the human body in the course of a lifetime no longer happen. But it's, as we looked at it, it was just some kind of hellscape along the lines of, King Midas or, vampires condemned to live forever. Then where this was going to lead into was, and we touched upon this, some potential problems with AI and the technocratic agenda, and then the idea of resistance to it. What can be done? Now, this is not just in physical terms, but in terms of, psychologically, that's one of the real battlegrounds, I think. So, in terms of problems with AI, we finished up last time talking about what I call digital dementia, which is increasingly complex supercomputers running all sorts of interconnected systems, and those basically malfunctioning, and what that means, what that would mean for the sort of end user, as it were, us, and what that would look like in terms of, well, if these systems are deemed infallible, but bearing in mind they were built by humans and started with human inputs, if a sort of self-learning or an AI dimension is allowed to take over, how far along the road would people go with, well, the computer can't make mistakes, the AI never lies. So maybe we can start there as a way of bringing in what we finished with last time and getting us into, in the first instance, some of the technical problems that some of these systems might present.
Yeah. Well, if we look at the post office case recently in Britain, I mean, it's a shocking case, an example of what happens when these systems are dysfunctional and don't work properly, and how they contribute towards miscarriages of justice. And I don't know what's true, but I see that the same system is used in your criminal record system. So that's or part of it. I'm not sure how true that is, but it's that kind of fear of dysfunction and inconvenience is something that people know about, being dependent on computers. But it doesn't really matter. Functionality is not important, because if order out of chaos is the principle, the cultivation of chaos is just as useful for the people who want a different type of order, or to elevate the type of order. And high transaction costs for us in our daily life, if it's very, very difficult for us to do ordinary things, is useful insofar as it's very difficult to organize and to focus on the problems that need our attention. But we have to think more and more in terms of AI, as we've talked about, and a shift to post-humanism, because transhumanism implies some degree of choice, and it's usually associated with people with a lot of power. And post-humanism is the end goal, as you've indicated, the idea of moving beyond the human. But it's also a philosophical movement which attacks the idea of the human, which says it's a bad thing constructed by imperial powers, and the special nature of the human has to be destroyed. And this goes hand in hand with AI. The two of them are complementary. They're two sides of the one pincer movement, if you like. So AI is a technology that implements a post-humanist ideal, and post-humanism is a kind of philosophy that sells it. It's the shop window, if you like, that makes it appear to be something nice and something interesting and something innovative. And this is a very, very strong movement, but effectively it means the end of the human race. So the end of the human as we know it, focused on ideas like breaking down barriers between the human and their environment, and effectively the technology penetrating into humans. So the important point to remember is that whatever dysfunctional things we have, whatever consequence of cyber insecurity, which is used as leverage to gain more control, the ultimate objective is to be able to control us with technology. And one story that comes to mind, or one book that comes to mind in this context, which was important, as you know, in relation to science fiction, from an English perspective and a broader global perspective, is The Coming Race. And the idea, from the late 19th century, and the idea that there would be an underground race, which were mainly electrical beings. Electricity comes into it, or had the vril, the power, which is used in the word they used in the brand name Bovril, actually, which is interesting. But the vril was this kind of electric-like power, which distinguished these groups that lived underground from the people that lived on the upper ground. And there is this general sense behind a lot of the disparate movements that we're moving from light beings to electrical beings. The arguments behind technocracy from the 1930s were predicated on changing from a normal economy as we know it towards one which is purely based on electricity. So the role of electricity is not what we think it is. And if we look at people like Steiner, he said that electricity is the evil form of light, or words to that effect. And there is an implication in all of this that the post-human form will be something which is controllable, switched on, switched off through a system of electricity or something, some element like that, so that we will be confined in an electrical grid ourselves. And this will be the mechanism by which perhaps nanoparticles, i.e. where we integrate, this is an important distinction as we're talking about our own approach, that a lot of these movements and the New World Order movements, they're really into distinctions between tactics and strategies and not confusing them. So some of the apparent problems are tactics in their hands to achieve a broader strategy. And the broader strategy in all cases will be to increase our dependence and integration into systems. So whatever solution comes up will always be a higher iteration solution which integrates us more. So when we get there, our digital currency after the great cyber insecurity collapse, for example, then they can move from that digital currency towards using the human body in the currency system, which is the objective. And then it's easy to move into the endosymbiosis direct control. So what I would say in all this, when we're thinking about our own strategy and a macro strategy, a micro and a macro strategy, what we do ourselves and what the problem is, that I mentioned the greatest game is control of our consciousness, or spiritual consciousness, if you like, a soul. This is the kind of the cosmic game behind it. There is no other game. It's not an end in itself to have better management or something like this. It's really about taking control of human consciousness by mechanical means, by a technical elite. And that's quite a clear objective. So we have to distinguish between short-term maneuvers that they do in order to gain more power, and we have to be able to anticipate them and distinguish between the tactics, strategy, and deeper things like the philosophy and the epistemology and all that kind of stuff. So I would say that there's going to be plenty of problems. Many of these problems will be created problems, calculated to gain more control, because our dependence is increasing. They've given us, as Bill Gates said in the 90s, we have to get children hooked on the computers. That's what he said. It's in his book, The Road Ahead. They've got us hooked, and the the dosage will be increasing. You know, we're becoming more electronic junkies by the day. Our dependence will go up. Their ability to do things will increase appropriately, and they will be able to move towards this post-human scenario. The post-human scenario can be assisted by the usual Malthusian levers they have of massive war, this overpopulation fear, which they always had, this fear of disease that they had, and particularly you can see it in Victorian London. It was very important in their mindset, and this intense desire to control, not just to control the people, but to control them down to a cellular level. So we really have to think in terms of what their end game is in order to understand all the things that can happen. And we then get better at predicting the social factors that are presented to us as surprises. And we also have to begin to think in decompartmentalized ways. So we don't think that communication technology policy is separate from pharmaceutical policy, or separate from geopolitics, or is separate from whatever. They're all integrated, and all of the levers are used and utilized or maneuvered or forced to achieve that ultimate strategy.
So we will today be focused more on near term and, things that will be happening ostensibly anyway, in our physical everyday lives. But of course, as you mentioned, this background is very important in the compartmentalized thinking
Yes.
and understanding the philosophy behind all of it. But we will talk, because I think a lot of people meeting them where they are kind of saying, yes, but what can I do?
Yeah.
And if they're only presented with theory and philosophy and great overarching historical, arcs, they can feel some people, what they want to know is, what can I do tomorrow?
Yeah.
Or what can I do today? But I think it's very useful to bring the things together. Say you're seeing these developments on TV and in your everyday life. You feel there's something wrong here. What does it mean? And what should I do next? But having the philosophical background then helps you inform the actions. Because that's the whole thing about this reality. It seems that we're in it, but not necessarily of it. But when people say to me, "Oh yes," in a sort of new age way, but life's just a dream, I'm like, well, but nevertheless, we're in that dream now, and we're interacting in that, and what we do is important. Just in passing, you mentioned Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. For people who are interested, Edward Bulwer-Lytton was in the Victorian era. He was writing. The book itself is strong in ideas. It's just not very well written, to be honest.
No.
I think it was at the time when the bar was maybe a bit lower. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I don't know where he would fit in the late 20th century. He probably would have been a pulp author, with lots of readers, as he had back then. But the whole thrust of it is very interesting, as you say, about this master race living, beneath the earth, the nature of their being, and it was actually influential on some high-ranking Nazis during the
that's right, yeah,
the Third Reich. They probably dispatched teams, because we know that the Nazis got all over the place, Antarctica, the North Pole, you name it. They were scouring the planet for evidence for their occult theories,
Yeah, but one of the reasons, just to why I start off with that, especially for people that may not have heard it, but just to remind people that the first thing has to be an analysis, a proper analysis of what the problem is. Because a lot of times when I'm listening to the alternative media or people of good criticism, they can go off on a tangent which becomes counterproductive. So what all I'm saying out of that is, make sure that you understand, and that we all do, perfect an analysis which is based on proper history. And I'll give you an example why it's relevant. I think London is critical. So reading about the history of London, the history of science, gives you a lot of insights into what's happening. For example, there's a lot of, you don't have to be particularly interested to have noticed that in the last 6 months, there's a huge increase in talk about UFOs. And a lot of people genuinely don't know what to make of this. They don't know, is this true? Is it accurate? Is it a psyop or whatever? And when we look at the agenda historically, and again, another London reference, The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, the main person behind the New World Order, it immediately makes one aware of what the tactical or strategic aim behind this idea of an alien invasion is, and the fact that it's been used historically. So what I'm saying about some of these issues, and particularly the historical issues, is they are practically relevant to how you interpret the world today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think we've established the importance of that. And really, as I was hinting at, trying to navigate current reality without that background, really you're flying blind.
Yes.
You can really be able to see things for what they are. In terms of the technology that we were speaking about earlier, what you mentioned about planned, disorder, planned chaos, and actual just spiraling chaos in some of these systems, I think we'll be looking at a mixture of both. I personally don't feel that, at least on a surface level, that every technological mass malfunction is designed, in the immediate term to create some kind of deliberate effect. There do seem to be technological problems, just things going wrong. Well, how deep you go behind that in terms of like what could be driving it is another matter. But technologically speaking, towards the end of the 20th century and now very much into the 21st, technology has become increasingly complex. I mean, it's doing more things in many cases, but not necessarily always better. We see this in consumer products, for example, the mobile phone, smartphone being the obvious example. They get increasingly complex, but how much better are they really at doing what previous, models did? And the increasing complexity brings with it more potential problems, technological malfunctions, and more sort of opaqueness. The more that increasing numbers of people don't understand the technology and the devices, they don't know what to do with them. There's just dwindling number of people who really understand the heart of some of this technology. That I see as, we're seeing this manifest in all sorts of areas, that the response to a technological problem, so you see this particularly with electric cars, for example, at the moment, or hybrid ones. The problem has developed here. So, because of technological complexity, so our response is another layer of technology, kind of on top of that. It seems to be very rarely does there seem to be, how can we simplify this? It seems to be because we have this technology, then technology must be applied. Technology is the only solution. A good example of this recently was something that I experienced a couple of times in my day-to-day life. We had one here in our city. It lasted less than an hour, but at one point, all of the cash processing technology, the little machines that the stores have that you tap your card on, all of that network went down. Didn't matter what bank anybody was using or what certain, internet service provider, it all went black. And interestingly, this affected the ATMs as well. So even if you had your card, you couldn't withdraw cash. So this started about 9 o'clock in the morning. That was resolved before 10 o'clock, but those of us in the middle of it, we didn't know how long it was going to take. You had a combination of like, okay, so you've got a card, but you can't use it anywhere. If you don't have cash, you can't get cash out. If you do have cash, you're facing increasing numbers of businesses and traders who don't take cash. So the whole system was paralyzed instantly. I mean, nobody died, you know what I mean? Because it didn't last that long. And if it carried on throughout the day, there would have been workarounds. But a lot of businesses would just have to have shuttered for the day if that had carried on. So for me, that's a very practical example that I think we're seeing more of in the systems that people use from day to day, whether it's payments or communications or, access to media or transport systems.
Yeah. And then same thing happened here with the supermarkets chains here. Their system went down and they were closed for a while, last year, the year before. So these things are going to happen, and everything will be used as a leverage to increase our dependence in a different way. So, these don't work. If you have this little chip, some other card, whatever, some ID, it will work easier. We don't need that. It's more efficient, etc. So there's leverage behind all these systems. But so that ratchet effect is built into all these systems. If you look at the investment in cash registers, for example, in the history of cash registers, it's ridiculous the amount of money invested in cash register systems in small operations. And there was a bigger reason behind that in relation to information gathering. But the bigger problem is in the formalization of informal relations. So as these systems increase, our human interactions decrease, and we have less and less human contact. And with AI, that's increasing. So if you listen to someone like Alexander Wang and Scale, his company, and what he talks about, a billionaire that talks about AI, he's saying that we'll be spending most of our time dealing with AI models in our daily life. So this is part of the problem, because it vindicates the argument that we're becoming post-human. We're not human in a recognizable way as we begin to not interact with humans, as we begin to lose skills of communication, or maybe not even be used to dealing with people anymore on a face-to-face level. These are skills that are developed, that are learned, and that can diminish. So there's a multilateral analysis that we have to use. Cash is really hard to come by here, or is really underused, and that's not going to change. And it's not going to change in most countries now. The die is cast on these things. The arguments against them should have been 10 years ago, and nobody cared or bothered. So most of these things are not going backwards, I don't believe, unfortunately. So I'm fairly pragmatic about describing what the issue is. People went for apparent convenience in countries like Sweden, and they're going to have to take the consequences of that, unfortunately. The re-establishment of alternative systems is going to be very, very difficult. I know a lot of people believe that they can be done with crypto. However, they don't understand how serious the government will get if they want to take away competing systems. A lot of my friends who are into crypto say, well, they can't control it, they can't govern it. We can always escape scrutiny. It will be simple. It will be what the master of the mint did in London when they wanted to get rid of counterfeit. And remember that Isaac Newton was the master of the mint as well. They will bring in the death penalty for people that use it, and I can see this happening in the future. And I can assure you that when they say it is a felony punishable by death under military law to utilize alternative systems, it will have an effect on the people that are believe that their technology can keep them away from this in the future. Will change their tune. This is the history of the enforcement of money rules. And the Isaac Newton used to prosecute people that were executed in London, or was involved in that, and people forget about that. This connection between science and money systems and currency, etc. And currency, notice the similarity to the word or the use of the word electricity. There is a correspondence between them. So some of these big things I'm not being defeatist about it, but we have to be very, very conscious that some of the battles have been lost. So we're going to have to be selective about how we deal with it. I mean, fundamentally, the primary I see the issue as primarily related to our perception of ourselves. It's before that. It's the issue of who we are and what we're willing to give up about ourselves. But we can't know what we're losing unless we have a proper inventory of what the human being is. And a lot of people are conceding notions of what the human is already. They've conceded the supernatural domain, for example, that it doesn't exist. The scientific model proves that it doesn't exist, for example. Excuse me. And these levels can happen on transactional basis. We can make concessions in our worldview through the way that we interact, use these systems, and communicate, for example. So a lot of people think that there's going to be the clock is going to be rewound on some of these issues. I don't see it in that way. I think we really have to begin to look at the stage that's coming after, because by the time we realized that we're behind the curve again, or that the move has happened, that the die has been cast, or we've crossed the Rubicon, we won't be ready for the next problem coming along on the line. So I'm not trying to be pessimistic about that. What I'm saying is that the ultimate issue behind it is deeper. The issue is, how do humans interact with humans? This is the deep issue that we have to consider in all these contexts.
Well, I mean, I have crypto, but really it's it's a form of gambling. Really, it's a casino. Don't put anything on the table you can't afford to lose. And one of the reasons I dipped my toe into that was because of with what do you do with your money? if you know what I mean. And here, maybe we could talk about that as, one of the practical responses, just, as going forward, it's been made increasingly difficult to, if you have any spare money at the end of the month, depending if you're not already, independently wealthy or secure in that front, what do you do with any spare money you've got? I mean, money in the bank's a waste of time. We hear talk now about negative interest rates, which would basically penalize people for holding money in the bank, not just through like not paying interest or interest well below inflation, but actually costing you money at the end of the month. Effectively, what that would mean is that, say you were paid 2,000 credits in a month in your job, if you didn't spend the 2,000 credits by the end of the month, you'd lose the balance. So it's gone beyond, saving over into like, got no incentive to hold on to anything, whatsoever. And then it's, what do you do with your money? So for me, crypto is just a roll of the dice, a gamble, thinking, well, I'll get some of this and see what happens. It's been up, it's been down, it's been yo-yoing all over the place. So, yeah, I mean, it's almost like we've been talking about, these developments and it's just inexorable march onward with them, and that, alternative systems will be very difficult to develop or implement. But people I talk to, I've been saying, look, based on what I'm doing, if you've got money at the end of the month, buy things that you'll be able to use in future. And this sort of thinking can go back to preppers, in the 70s and 80s, when it looked like nuclear war might be a thing. But buy some things you can use in future and that other people might find useful. So we saw this in a perverse form during the pandemic response, when everybody suddenly went berserk and started buying 10 times more toilet rolls than they needed. Yeah, and how that became a commodity. But I've bought things like gold and silver and really nice bottles of whiskey, and just things that over time other people have shown an interest in or a willingness to sort of say, I'll have that if you have this. So I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but it's been made increasingly difficult for people to do anything constructive in that sense with their money, and combined with the materialism and consumerist culture, which is pushing people to sort of completely opposite of what I've just said, buy things that they don't need. And all of what I've said predicated on the idea that anybody would have any spare money left at the end of the day.
Well, as I say, the best things in life are free. In this, there is a strange paradox about the nature of our needs in a complex society, and I do think that there is a mentality, a kind of survival mentality, or a frugal mentality that will be necessary to deal with the situations that arise, that we're not going to be living in the same way that we have done hitherto.
That concludes part 1 of our interview. Part 2 will be available soon in the subscribers area at legalizefreedom.com.
legalizefreedom.com